Welcome to our channel. Here is a story based on a famous quote by psychologist Carl Jung. Depression is like a woman dressed in black. If she appears, don't shoo her away. Invite her in, offer her a seat, treat her like a guest, and listen to what she has to say. These words, spoken by Carl Jung, remind us of a truth we often fear to face, that sorrow is not an enemy to defeat, but a visitor to understand. This is the story of Evelyn, a woman who once lived in the stillness of her own loneliness. A woman who, when darkness knocked at her door, chose not to turn it away. She invited it in. She listened. And through that quiet, painful, beautiful conversation, she found something unexpected: herself. This is her journey. The journey of meeting the woman in black. Stay tuned and listen. We will deliver the content to you through 8 chapters of the story. Let's get started. Chapter 1. A Knock at Midnight. There are winter nights so long that you can no longer tell where the darkness outside the window ends and where the emptiness within begins. Evelyn sat in her small, narrow room, the only light coming from a pale, flickering desk lamp. She closed the book in her hands, realizing she couldn't even remember what page she was on, and let out a long sigh, not knowing exactly what she was sighing for. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the roof, a slow, weary rhythm, like the heartbeat of someone too tired to go on. This was how Evelyn had been living for some time now, quietly alone, forgetting even how to hope for anything new. Days blurred into each other, leaving no mark, and the nights were endless stretches of stillness. Until tonight. When the clock's hands passed midnight, there came a knock at the door. At first, it was so soft that Evelyn thought she might have imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time, patient and deliberate. She hesitated. No one ever came to her house at this hour. No one even knew where she lived, save for a few old acquaintances she had long stopped keeping in touch with. Part of her wanted to remain silent, to pretend she hadn't heard a thing. But somewhere deep inside, a part of her she thought had long dried up. Something stirred, urging her to move. Her footsteps were cautious on the wooden floor. Her hand, cold and trembling, grasped the door handle. Slowly, Evelyn opened the door just a crack. Outside, the rain had softened into a thin, ghostly mist, and standing there on her doorstep was a woman. She wore a long black dress that brushed the ground, its heavy fabric drenched by the rain. A wide-brimmed black hat shadowed most of her face, revealing only a slender chin and tightly pressed lips. She said nothing. She simply stood there, still and silent, as if she were a part of the night itself. A chill ran down Evelyn's spine, partly from the cold, but mostly from a deeper, shapeless fear. This woman seemed to carry with her the whole weight of darkness. Evelyn's first instinct was to slam the door shut, lock it, hide under blankets, pretend no one had ever come, but somehow she didn't. There was something about the woman's silent presence, a stillness heavy with sadness, a wordless plea, that made it impossible for Evelyn to turn away. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," she heard herself say, her voice rough. The woman in black bowed her head slightly, then stepped inside. The damp chill of the night clung to her and seeped into the small house as she crossed the threshold. Evelyn closed the door behind her and turned back to the woman. She still hadn't removed her hat, nor had she wiped away the droplets of rain that slid down her face. Once again, silence settled between them. Evelyn gestured awkwardly toward the armchair near the fireplace. "Please have a seat," she said, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. The woman moved with slow, deliberate grace as she sat down. Every motion was careful, almost ceremonial. Evelyn stood there, unsure of what to do next. She had never entertained a guest like this before. A guest who gave no name, no purpose, no request. She felt completely at a loss. "I'll make some tea," she murmured, not waiting for a reply. In the kitchen, her hands fumbled with the kettle, shaking slightly. Steam curled up into the air, wrapping her in a haze of bewilderment. She found 2 white porcelain cups, ones that hadn't been used in a very long time. Evelyn poured the tea and carried the cups back to the living room. The woman remained where she sat, as still as a statue. Evelyn placed a cup in front of her on the small wooden table, keeping the other for herself. She lowered herself into the chair opposite, close enough to feel the damp chill still radiating from the woman's dress. They sat like that, facing each other across the small space. The only sounds the ticking of the old clock and the distant steady whisper of rain. Evelyn took tentative sips of her tea, stealing glances at her guest. Beneath the shadow of the hat, she couldn't quite see the woman's eyes, but she could feel the gaze, deep and unblinking, as if it could see straight through her. And Evelyn began to wonder, who was this woman? A ghost? A dream? Or something deeper still? A forgotten part of herself, standing now in the flesh. She didn't know, and strangely, she no longer wanted to know. She sat quietly, listening not just to the sounds of the room, but to something else. Something older, slower, murmuring from deep within her. Tonight, Evelyn had opened her door. Tonight, she had allowed the darkness to enter, without panic, without flight. And in that silent presence, the night itself began whispering stories she had long tried to forget. Chapter 2. The silent guest hours passed, though Evelyn could not have said how many. The night had thickened outside, the rain a gentle hush against the windows. The house, usually so cold and hollow, now felt heavy with an unseen presence. The woman in black had not spoken a word. She sat there in the armchair by the fireplace, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her head bowed just enough to suggest thoughtfulness, or perhaps sorrow. The cup of tea Evelyn had offered remained untouched, the steam long since faded into the air. Evelyn shifted in her chair. She could not shake the sense that she should say something, break the silence that stretched between them like a taut wire. Yet every time she opened her mouth, the words withered before they could form. What could she possibly say to this figure of rain and night? Instead, she found herself studying the woman's hands. Slender, delicate, yet oddly strong. They were not the hands of a stranger. There was something hauntingly familiar about them, as if she had seen them once in a dream she had long since forgotten. Outside, the wind stirred, rattling the branches against the windows. Inside, the silence grew deeper, richer, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Evelyn set her teacup down with a soft clink. "I don't know who you are," she said finally, her voice breaking into the stillness like a small, uncertain flame. "But you're welcome here. You can stay if you need to." The woman lifted her head slightly, the brim of her hat shifting just enough for Evelyn to catch a glimpse of her face. Pale, shadowed, with eyes that held oceans of unspoken words. Still, the woman said nothing. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. It was not fear that gripped her now, but something deeper, a raw, aching recognition, a knowing without understanding. "You don't have to speak," Evelyn murmured, surprising herself with the gentleness in her own voice. "I'll listen anyway." The woman in black tilted her head, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the offer. So Evelyn spoke. At first, the words came awkwardly, small, hesitant pieces of herself she scarcely knew how to share. She spoke of her empty days, of the gray weight that pressed against her every morning she opened her eyes. She spoke of the dreams she had once nurtured, now lying abandoned like old, cracked pottery in some forgotten attic of her mind. The more she spoke, the easier it became. The words unraveled from her like a spool of thread, tangling at her feet. She spoke of loneliness, not the simple solitude of being alone, but the deeper, colder loneliness of feeling unseen, even by herself. She spoke of nights spent staring into the dark ceiling, wondering if she had somehow missed the life she was supposed to live. And the woman listened. She did not interrupt, did not flinch, did not offer hollow reassurances. She simply sat, her presence a silent permission for Evelyn to be exactly as broken, as weary, as tangled as she needed to be. Tears blurred Evelyn's vision, surprising her. It had been so long since she had cried that she had almost forgotten how it felt. The release, the sting, the strange, bittersweet relief of it. The woman remained still, a steadfast shadow in the warm, flickering light. When Evelyn's voice finally faltered into silence, she leaned back in her chair, exhausted but strangely lighter, as if she had been carrying a weight she didn't know she bore, and had finally set it down. For the first time, the woman moved. She reached out, slowly, gently, and placed her hand over Evelyn's. Her touch was cool, but not cold, solid, real. Evelyn looked up, and for a heartbeat their eyes met fully. In that gaze, Evelyn saw not a stranger, not a ghost, but something far more intimate, a reflection of herself, her fears, her grief, her silent battles, all mirrored back at her with compassion instead of judgment. The woman gave a small, almost imperceptible nod as if to say, "I see you. I have always seen you." And Evelyn, without knowing why, nodded back. In that simple, silent exchange, something shifted inside her. A door creaking open, a forgotten room flooded with light. The night pressed on outside, dark and endless. But inside the small house, warmth bloomed like the first quiet promise of spring. Evelyn did not know who this woman truly was. Perhaps she was sorrow. Perhaps she was memory. Perhaps she was the part of Evelyn herself she had long abandoned. But whoever she was, Evelyn knew this. Tonight she had not turned her away. Tonight she had invited her in, offered her a seat, and listened. And that perhaps was the beginning of something new. Chapter 3. The Voice Beneath Silence. The next morning, Evelyn woke to a strange stillness, the kind that hangs in the air after a storm has passed. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream. The knock at midnight, the woman in black, the long, aching conversation she had poured out like water breaking through a dam. Perhaps her mind, starved for connection, had conjured the whole encounter. But when she sat up and looked across the room, she saw the second teacup still sitting on the table, untouched, cold and very real. And she knew. The woman had been here, Had she left? Or was she still somewhere within these walls, waiting patiently in the silence? Evelyn stood and moved quietly through the house. The front door remained closed. The windows still shuddered softly against the lingering wind. In the kitchen, the kettle sat on the stove, its surface spotted with the dried traces of last night's steam. There was no sign of the woman. And yet Evelyn could feel her, a presence woven into the very air, like the faint perfume of rain soaked into the wood, like the echo of a song long after the last note has faded. She returned to the living room and sat down, facing the empty armchair. "Are you still here?" she asked aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no answer, but deep inside, in a place words rarely reached, Evelyn sensed a stirring. Not a voice exactly, but a feeling, an understanding. She closed her eyes and listened. At first, she heard only the ordinary sounds of the house, the creak of old wood, the distant ticking of the clock. But as she let her mind grow still, another sound began to surface. A voice, soft, steady, ancient. It spoke not in words, but in emotions. Heavy waves that rose and fell inside her chest. Regret, loss, fear, loneliness, but also resilience, tenderness, and something deeper still, a quiet, unwavering hope that had survived even the longest winters. The woman in black was not gone. She was within her now, the part of Evelyn she had long ignored, misunderstood, even feared. All her life, Evelyn had run from sadness, treating it like an enemy, a sickness to be cured, a weakness to be hidden. She had built walls, grown thorns around her heart, convinced herself that to survive meant to remain untouched. But now she understood. Sadness had not come to destroy her. It had come to sit with her, to hold her hand through the nights she thought she couldn't survive, to remind her that feeling deeply was not a flaw, but a gift. The tears came again, but this time they did not sting. They flowed easily, cleansing, like spring rivers breaking through frozen earth. Evelyn wept for all the years she had lived half alive, for all the nights she had curled into herself believing she was alone. She wept for the girl she had once been, the woman she had become, and the life still waiting for her beyond the walls of fear she had built. And when her tears subsided, a new silence settled, not heavy, but light, not empty, but full. Evelyn opened her eyes. The armchair across from her remained empty, yet somehow she felt less alone than she ever had before. She rose slowly and crossed the room. Gently, she picked up the untouched cup of tea and carried it to the sink. The small act, washing the cup, drying it, setting it back on the shelf, felt sacred, like a ceremony honoring something unseen but profoundly real. The woman in black would visit again. Evelyn knew that now. There would be other nights when the knock would come, when the weight of the world would press heavy against her chest. But she would not fear it anymore. She would open the door. She would offer a seat. She would listen. And each time, she would grow a little stronger, a little softer, a little more alive. Outside, the clouds began to break, letting thin rays of gold slip through. The storm had passed, but the memory of the night, of the woman, of the silent conversation between two halves of a heart, would remain. And Evelyn, for the first time in a long, long while, stepped forward into the day not with dread, but with a quiet, trembling hope. Chapter 4. Lessons in the quiet days past. The world outside Evelyn's small house moved forward as it always had, indifferent and busy, but inside, time seemed to flow differently, slower, as if the very air were thicker with meaning. Since that night, Evelyn often felt the woman's presence nearby. Sometimes she would catch a glimpse of her reflection in the window, the outline of a figure draped in black, standing silently behind her. Other times it was simply a feeling, a hush in the room, a gentle weight on her chest, a coolness brushing against her hand as she reached for a cup or turned a page. The woman no longer frightened her. Instead, Evelyn welcomed her appearances, though the woman never spoke, and her expression, when visible, was always the same: somber, calm, patient. At first, Evelyn thought the woman had come only to remind her of her sorrow, to hold it up like a mirror and force her to stare into its depths. And in those first days, Evelyn did just that. She sat in the quiet and faced her sadness, no longer flinching away. But gradually, something unexpected happened. As Evelyn listened, truly listened, she began to hear not just grief and pain, but something else beneath it. Like a second melody woven under a sad song, quiet but certain. It was strength. The strength it had taken to endure lonely nights. The strength to wake up every morning, even when the world felt gray and meaningless. The strength to sit with brokenness and not let it consume her. The woman in black had not come only to mourn with her. She had come to show her what had survived. Evelyn learned to move through her days with a new kind of attention. She noticed the way light spilled across the floor in the afternoons, how the tea steamed like small clouds rising from her hands, how even sorrow could have texture, depth, a strange and tender beauty. Sometimes the woman would appear beside her when she least expected it. In the garden, as Evelyn knelt to pull weeds from the stubborn earth. By the window as she watched the first snow of winter drift down like feathers. Always silent, always present. And Evelyn began to realize something profound. Pain was not her enemy. It was a companion, a teacher, guiding her gently back toward herself. There were still nights when the sadness pressed heavy against her ribs. Still mornings when she wished she could remain buried under the covers forever. But now, when those moments came, Evelyn did not panic. She did not run. She remembered the knock at midnight, the invitation, the quiet cup of tea shared with her silent guest. And she would say softly, almost smiling, "Come in. Sit with me. Tell me what you need me to hear." The woman would stay a while, always respectfully, always without cruelty. And then, when Evelyn was ready, she would leave, not vanquished, but honored. The pain did not disappear. It grew lighter, more bearable. A companion she could walk with, instead of a shadow she had to flee from. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Evelyn's heart began to open to more than just sorrow. She found herself planting seeds in the garden again. She began writing small notes to herself, tucking them into books like secret messages from a future self. She even dreamed timidly of inviting real human company into her quiet house once more. The woman in black still visited, but she no longer brought fear. She brought understanding. She brought permission to be fully human, in joy and in sorrow alike. Evelyn had learned to open the door not only to the darkness, but also to the light. And in that balance, life, messy, aching, beautiful life, began to return. Chapter 5. Carrying the Darkness. Winter deepened. The days grew shorter, and the night stretched long across the land like a heavy velvet curtain. The trees stood bare against the sky, their black branches reaching out like fragile bones. Inside her little house, Evelyn moved quietly through the deepening cold, her breath misting in the mornings, her hands wrapped around warm cups of tea. The world outside seemed to fall away, leaving her alone with her thoughts and with her silent guest. The woman in black had not left, but she no longer needed to appear in physical form for Evelyn to feel her presence. She was there, woven into the fabric of Evelyn's being now. A familiar companion, not always seen, but always felt. At first, Evelyn had wondered if healing meant the woman would eventually vanish, that someday she would wake up, bright and whole, with no trace of sorrow left. But the days taught her otherwise. Healing was not erasing, it was carrying, learning to walk forward even with the weight in her chest, even with the memory of nights spent weeping into her own hands. The woman in black had taught her that. Some days Evelyn could feel the weight more sharply, a cold hand on her shoulder, a shadow just behind her steps. Other days it was softer, like a quiet hum beneath her heartbeat. But always, always it was there, and she no longer fought it. She wore her sorrow like a second skin now, not as armor, not as shame, but as acknowledgement, a part of her story, a part of her strength. She spoke to it sometimes, not aloud, but in the silent language of the heart. "I see you," she would think as she stirred soup at the stove or buttoned her coat against the wind. "I know you're there, and that's all right." There was a strange kind of peace in that, not the bright, ringing peace she had once imagined, but a deeper, earthier kind, like the steady warmth of a fire banked low against a long winter night. She began to understand that pain would visit her again, many times. There would be new losses, new griefs, new nights when the world would feel unbearably heavy. But she also understood now that she could survive them because she had learned the secret whispered to her by the woman in black. Sorrow, when honored instead of feared, could become a kind of quiet strength, a bridge to a deeper, richer life. She would not crumble beneath it. She would carry it, not because she was unbreakable, but because she was willing to be broken and still move forward. That was what true strength was. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Evelyn stood by the window and watched the flakes swirl against the darkening sky. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and closed her eyes. She could feel the woman standing beside her, not as an intrusion, but as a steady, grounding presence. No words were needed. Together they watched the world soften under a blanket of white. Together they accepted the night. And when Evelyn finally turned away from the window and walked back toward the flickering hearth, she smiled, small, quiet, but real. The darkness would walk with her, but so would the light, and she was no longer afraid of either. Chapter 6. Moments of Light. The days after the snow began to melt were quieter than usual. Spring was slow to arrive, the earth reluctant to shake off the chill of winter. Yet every morning as Evelyn stepped outside, she could feel the subtle shift in the air, the promise of something new, something warmer. The garden, once barren and cold, was beginning to stir. Tiny buds pushed through the soil, delicate green shoots reaching toward the sun, unsure but determined. It was a sign, a promise perhaps, that life always finds a way to begin again, no matter how long the frost lingers. Evelyn spent her mornings kneeling in the garden, her fingers buried in the cool earth. She planted seeds, watered them with careful hands, and watched as they stretched toward the sky. For the first time in a long time, she felt a quiet joy in the simple act of tending to something, anything, other than her own heartache. The woman in black was still with her, though she no longer stood in the shadows, a looming presence. Now she felt like a quiet companion, no longer a visitor, but a part of the landscape of Evelyn's life. Sometimes as Evelyn worked, she would catch a glimmer of her in the corner of her eye. A soft rustle of fabric, a brief flicker of black against the backdrop of green. But the woman did not speak, and perhaps for the first time, Evelyn understood that the silence wasn't an absence of communication. It was an invitation to simply be, an invitation to witness the small, beautiful moments of life that often go unnoticed, an invitation to exist fully in both the darkness and the light. One morning, as Evelyn sat with her back against the old oak tree, the sun warm on her face, she realized something profound. She was no longer afraid of the light. For so long, she had believed that the light, the joy, the laughter, the peace would be fleeting, a fragile thing that could be shattered at any moment. She had spent so much time hiding from it, afraid that it would only make her darkness more unbearable. But now, with the first signs of spring all around her, Evelyn understood. The light was not the opposite of the darkness. It was born from it. Just as the flowers bloomed from the cold, hard ground, the light in her heart had emerged from the shadows, and it was real. It was lasting. The woman in black, silent as ever, stood beside her, not as a reminder of what she had lost, but as a witness to all she had gained. She was there, not as the source of her suffering, but as a guide, a presence that had taught Evelyn how to embrace the full spectrum of life. As Evelyn rose from the ground, wiping the dirt from her hands, she felt a quiet strength inside her. She was no longer a stranger to her own heart. She had learned to sit with her sorrow, and now she was learning how to dance with her joy. The world outside her small house was waking up, and so too was she. Chapter 7. An Open Door. It was a warm evening when Evelyn first thought about opening the door. She had always kept herself at a distance from others. The quiet of her house, the stillness of her world, had become her sanctuary, a place where no one could reach her, where nothing could hurt her. But something had begun to change within her. For months now, the woman in black had been a constant, silent companion, teaching her how to live with sorrow, how to accept the darkness, and how to find the strength that lay hidden beneath it all. And now, for the first time, Evelyn felt ready for something new. There had been moments, small, fleeting moments, when she had thought of reaching out to the world outside, when she had felt a spark of curiosity, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could let someone else in. But fear always stopped her. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing the very thing she had spent so long protecting, her solitude. Yet the quiet strength she had gained from the woman in black whispered to her that the door could not remain closed forever, that to live fully, to truly heal, meant not only embracing the darkness, but also the light, the connections, the relationships, the love that could fill her life in ways she never thought possible. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, staring at the old wooden door that led to the outside world. For a long time, she had been content to keep it shut, to keep herself enclosed in her small, quiet home. But tonight, something shifted. She could feel it in her bones, a soft stirring of possibility. Evelyn stood slowly, as if testing the ground beneath her feet. She crossed the room and stood before the door. With a deep breath, she placed her hand on the doorknob. It felt cold, like the night itself, but also strangely inviting. The door had always been there, just waiting to be opened. For the first time, she felt no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet certainty. She turned the knob. The door creaked open. Outside, the evening air was soft and cool, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. The world beyond her door seemed so large, so full of possibility, and yet in that moment, it felt welcoming, not overwhelming. As she stepped outside, Evelyn felt the weight of the past year lift, just a little. The woman in black, though she had not spoken, was there. Not as a figure, but as a presence, a quiet part of Evelyn that had become a part of the landscape. Her absence no longer felt like a loss, but a part of the journey that had brought Evelyn to this moment. She looked up at the sky, watching as the last of the daylight faded and the first stars began to appear, small and bright against the darkening blue. It was a beautiful, peaceful evening, the kind of evening she had once believed would never come again. Evelyn felt ready to step out of the quiet, ready to open her heart, ready to let others see her, not as someone defined by her sadness, but as a woman who had learned to live with it, to carry it, and still find beauty in the world. The door was open, and Evelyn was no longer afraid of what lay beyond it. She smiled softly to herself, the woman in black standing silently beside her, no longer a shadow, but a part of her own heart, always there, always present, guiding her into the next chapter of her life. Chapter 8, The Woman's Last Visit. The days had turned to months. The seasons had shifted from spring to summer, and Evelyn's life had, too, shifted along with them. No longer the quiet, secluded existence she once knew, but a life filled with new connections, new joys, and yes, new sorrows. The woman in black had not left her, but Evelyn no longer felt her presence as she once had. The figure that had once loomed over her, guiding her through the darkest parts of herself, now felt like an old, cherished memory. A guide who had fulfilled her purpose and would soon be moving on. It was a warm afternoon when Evelyn felt the familiar stir of the air around her. The shift that always came before the woman appeared. She was sitting by the window, a book open in her lap, watching the soft wind stir the leaves outside. And then she was there, the woman in black, standing silently in the doorway, as if she had never left, as if she had always been a part of the room. This time, there was no fear, no sadness, just a quiet understanding. The woman's presence had changed in some subtle, unspoken way. She was not here to guide or teach anymore. Instead, she was here as a final visit, a closing chapter in a journey that had lasted for what felt like both a lifetime and only an instant. Evelyn closed her book and stood, walking toward the door. She didn't have to ask why the woman had come, because she already knew. She had been prepared for this moment. The last lesson the woman would teach her had already been given. The lesson of embracing both light and dark, of knowing that life was neither about escaping sorrow nor holding on to it, but about moving forward regardless. The woman in black looked at her with those quiet, steady eyes, and Evelyn smiled. It was a small, gentle smile, one that carried no sadness, only gratitude. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered, the words feeling more like a prayer than a sentence. "Thank you for staying with me, for showing me the way." The woman nodded, her expression still as calm as it had always been. And for the first time, Evelyn understood. The woman had never been a figure of darkness to be feared. She had been the embodiment of everything Evelyn needed to confront in order to move on. The grief, the pain, the brokenness, but also the strength, the resilience, and the beauty that could emerge from it all. The woman in black did not speak. She simply gave one last, knowing look. And then, as gently as she had arrived, she turned and began to fade into the shadows. Evelyn stood still, watching, her heart full but unburdened. She did not try to hold on to the moment. She did not try to call her back. She understood that this was how things were meant to be. The woman had been a guest in her life, and now it was time for her to leave. Not as a departure, but as a quiet passing, like a chapter ending. As the last of the woman's form dissolved into the dimming light, Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years fall away, leaving her lighter, more whole. She looked around her home, the small, quiet space she had filled with new beginnings, with hope, with the warmth of human connection. She could feel the woman in black still with her, not as a shadow, but as a part of herself, a part of her story. The door was open now. The world outside, once so vast and intimidating, was now a place she could step into without fear. Evelyn smiled again, this time more brightly. She was ready to live fully, not just with the light, but with the dark as well. And in that balance, she had learned to embrace the beauty of both. And so, the woman in black left. Not in silence, but in peace. Evelyn walked to the window, looking out at the world, at the life waiting for her. And as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, she knew the journey would continue. Not always easy, but always meaningful. The woman in black was gone, but she had left a gift behind, the ability to embrace both darkness and light, to live with the ebb and flow of life, to face each day with the quiet strength that only comes from fully knowing oneself. Thank you for walking with us through this journey, a journey into the quiet places of the heart, where sorrow, acceptance, and healing meet. If this story touched you or made you reflect even for a moment, I invite you to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of the unseen, the unspoken, and the beautiful struggles we all face, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means more than you know. Until next time, take care of your heart and always remember to listen.